we're going to cross right to the Elysée Palace here in Paris, where President Emmanuel Macron is speaking alongside U.S. President Joe Biden.
Wife, Jill Biden, for the 80th anniversary of the D-Day landings in Normandy. Thank you for this. I think that your veterans and our veterans and those of all of our allied forces were honored by your presence, as well as the many leaders by your side on the 6th of June, and with the warmth of the popular welcome they received. Your presence here says a lot of the strength of our alliance and what links the United States and France, a union of blood shed in service of freedom and the independence of our nations. This is what brings us together, blood, unfortunately. But it links our two flags and our two nations. Thank you very much for your presence. With the President today, we were able to talk about the major topics around the world which commit us. First and foremost, Ukraine. Men and women are fighting with remarkable courage, driven by the will to not cede in the face of the Russian attack, which nothing justified. Collectively, we reacted to provide our support to this European nation struggling for its survival and freedom, and we will continue to do so as long as necessary, with as much intensity as necessary. I wish to thank you once again, Mr. President, for the commitment of the United States and the recent decision that you just confirmed, which puts by our sides an essential role in this conflict, where it's the security and the stability of Europe which is at stake. So thank you. And I believe that we have a shared vision of the war unfolding in Ukraine today. We've taken a lot of shared decisions. The authorization we provided so that Ukraine can strike back at their aggressors, the important efforts by our countries to equip the Ukraine armed forces, and we've also taken several fundamental decisions. We've talked about the details in the war unfolding there, and we agree on this, and we'll both be at the G7 summit, where we hope that all of the members of the G7 can once again commit to supplying $50 billion in support of Ukraine, and then the peace conference, which will be held to structure our debates, and then the NATO summit in Washington. On the question of Ukraine, our shared vision is that of respecting international law, with the freedom of people to self-determination, fundamental rights for our nations. And again, thank you very much for being by the side of Europe. The tight coordination between the United States and France also takes part elsewhere. Although we're confronted with a multiplication of crises, we base ourselves on the same principles with the same determination. In Gaza, we wish to obtain the immediate release of all hostages, and we are very gladdened by the release of 4 Israeli hostages by the Israeli army today. We wish to see a ceasefire and the beginning of a political end to this crisis for lasting, sustainable peace to meet the need for security of both of these peoples, which is why we support the idea of a global agreement with the United States. After 9 months of conflict, the situation in Rafah and the human casualties are unacceptable. And it's also unacceptable that Israel does not let through humanitarian aid, as the international community has been requesting over several months, and is not listening to our demands for a ceasefire. And the United Nations Security Council must play its role. In parallel, we will continue our efforts, our joint efforts, to avoid any outbreaks in the region, in Lebanon, for example. It's urgent to prevent any further escalation. And we are implementing very tight cooperation between our two countries in our discussions with Israel on one hand and with Lebanon on the other.
Nous faisons
For Iran,
le même constat
we have the same observation,
d'une stratégie d'escalade,
a strategy of escalation,
qu'il s'agisse des attaques sans précédent
whether
contre
the
Israël,
unprecedented attacks on Israel,
des manœuvres de déstabilisation
maneuvers
régionale,
to
ou bien sûr
destabilize
du
the
programme
entire
nucléaire
region, and then the
iranien.
nuclear program as
Nos
well
deux pays
in
sont
Iran.
déterminés à
Both of our
exercer les
countries are
pressions
determined
nécessaires
to
pour
exert
enrayer cette
necessary
tendance,
pressure
ce
to
que nous
stop
avons
these
encore démontré
worrying
il
trends,
y a
as we
quelques jours à
demonstrated
peine,
again just
en
a few days
adoptant
ago
ensemble une
by
résolution à
together
l'Agence
adopting a
internationale de
resolution
l'énergie
at the
atomique.
International
C'est la même
Atomic Energy
coordination et la même
Agency.
volonté qu'il n'y ait
The
pas de
same
double standard
coordination
qui est au cœur
and the
aussi
same
de
wish to
notre
avoid any double standards.
coordination en Afrique,
They were also
dans les crises
coordinating
au
in
Soudan,
Africa, in the
dans
crisis in
l'Est de la République
Sudan,
démocratique
in the
du Congo,
Democratic Republic of Congo,
et dans l'ensemble des points de tension régionaux.
and throughout
Au-delà
all
des crises,
areas
nos deux
of the
pays,
continent.
animés par le même
Both of
sens
our
de
countries
leadership,
have
vont
the
continuer
same sense of
d'agir
leadership, and we've
pour répondre
continued
aux
to
défis
take
de notre
actions to
temps,
meet the challenges of our
en
day,
particulier ceux qui touchent
in
les pays les plus
particular
vulnérables.
those that affect the most
C'est
vulnerable
cette unité que nous
countries.
voulons
This is
pour
this
rendre justement
unity that we need
l'ordre international plus juste. C'est tout le sens
to make the international
du pacte de
order
Paris pour les peuples et
fairer.
la
And that
planète,
is the
sur
sense
lequel
of
nous
the
allons
Paris
travailler
Pact for
ensemble,
people on the
mais aussi
planet,
des
which we'll be working on
initiatives portant sur
together,
une
as well as
fiscalité plus
initiatives
efficace,
on
notre
more
action pour
efficient
accélérer la sortie du
taxation,
charbon,
accelerating the
préparatifs
end
en
of
vue de la
coal,
conférence des Nations Unies
preparations
sur
for the United Nations
l'océan,
Conference on Oceans,
comme notre mobilisation
just
sur
like our
la santé
mobilization
mondiale avec
for World
un
Health,
sommet qui se tiendra
with a
pour
summit which will be
l'Alliance
held
du vaccin auquel
for
nous
the
travaillons
vaccine
ensemble
alliance that we are
et qui se
working
tiendra à
on
Paris
together,
dans
which will be
quelques
held
semaines.
in Paris in a few
C'est la
weeks.
même volonté
It's
aussi
the
qui est
same
au cœur
willingness
de
as
la
well,
trêve
which is at the
olympique
heart
qui a
of
été
the Olympic
agréée par une
truce
résolution des Nations Unies il y a
with a
maintenant
resolution
quelques
by
jours.
the United Nations just a few
Sur
days
le plan
ago.
économique, nous avons
On
exprimé également les mêmes inquiétudes à
economics,
l'égard
we
des
have the
pratiques
same worries
potentiellement
with
déloyales de la
the
Chine ayant pour
disloyal
conséquence la
practices by
création de
China,
surcapacités.
leading to an
Sujet d'une
overcapacity,
telle importance pour l'économie mondiale
which is extremely
que nous
important
devons
for the
agir
world
de manière
economy, and we
coordonnée.
must take coordinated
Lors de ma
action.
visite en décembre
During
2022,
my
j'avais eu l'occasion
visit in
d'expliquer les
December
conséquences de
2022, I was able
l'Inflation
to
Reduction Act
explain the
sur
consequences
l'économie
of the Inflation
européenne.
Reduction Act on the
Nous en
European
avons
economy.
parlé à nouveau.
We've mentioned
Cette
this again,
législation
and this
est utile.
legislation is
Elle
useful. It allows
contribuer, même d'accélérer la
and it
décarbonation
contributes
de
and
l'économie
accelerates the
américaine, et
decarbonization
donc
of
la
the
mise en
American
œuvre de l'accord de
economy,
Paris.
and therefore
Notre
the
volonté
implementation of
est
the Paris
véritablement que
Agreement.
nous
And
puissions
our
aller vers une
willingness is that we can
resynchronisation de nos
resynchronize
économies entre
our
les
efforts,
États-Unis
our
d'Amérique et les
economies
économies
between
européennes
the United States and
en termes de
Europe
régulation, en termes de
to
niveau d'investissement
regulate the levels of
et
investment,
sur les grands domaines comme aussi
and in
ceux
the major
de clean
areas
tech, de
such as
l'intelligence
green tech,
artificielle,
artificial
mais également
intelligence,
des
as
sujets
well as
agroalimentaires.
agri-food
Enfin, nous voulons
issues.
construire aussi sur le
We
plan
also
bilatéral une
wish
coopération
bilaterally
renforcée.
to reinforce our
Les étudiants
cooperation.
américains, les chercheurs américains, les entrepreneurs
American
américains
researchers, American business people,
dans
American
notre pays. Nous
students are
souhaitons qu'ils
welcome
soient
to our
encore plus nombreux.
country. We want them
Nous
to
avons
come
aussi des
in ever
coopérations
greater
bâties,
numbers.
lors de la visite d'État
And
de
then during the state
2022,
visit
qui a
in December
renforcé à
2022,
cet
we've
égard.
also
Je pense au
reinforced
nucléaire civil, au
mechanisms
spatial,
with
nous souhaitons
civil
aller plus loin.
and
Et d'ailleurs,
spatial
depuis, plusieurs accords ont
cooperation.
été signés
We've signed
entre le
several
CNES et la
agreements
NASA sur
between the
l'observation de
CNES
la
and
Terre,
NASA
entre
for
autres,
observation
ou,
of the Earth,
sur
among
le
others,
programme Artemis.
and the Artemis
Je suis
program.
aussi fier de
I'm
pouvoir
also
dire aujourd'hui
proud to
que
be
le
able to say
premier
today
TGV américain
that the first American
par Alstom
TGV built
sera
by
mis en
Alstom
service aux
will enter
États-Unis
into
d'ici la fin de
service
l'année,
in the
ce qui est
United
la
States
marque
by the
officielle
end of the
coopération
year,
accrue
which also shows
entre nos
increased
industries
cooperation between
ferroviaires.
our rail
Réussite qui
industries,
marque notre ambition
which marks our
économique
ambition
et de
for the
transition énergétique en ayant recours à
economy
l'excellence
and the energy
technologique
transition thanks
française.
to French
aussi saluer ici
technological
l'importance des
excellence.
investissements
And I
américains
also
en
wish to
France,
salute American
encore très
investments in
présent lors du
France.
sommet Choose France il y a
Present during the
quelques semaines.
Choose France Summit held
La
a few
France va
weeks
également
ago.
lancer une
France will
fondation
also be
inédite à hauteur
launching
de 100 millions
a
d'euros
foundation with
qui
100
va nous
million
permettre
euros to allow
d'augmenter
us to
massivement les échanges
massively
universitaires
increase
et de
exchanges
recherche
between
entre nos deux
universities and
Et je veux
research in our
remercier
two
les
countries. And I
entreprises qui
wish
se
to
sont joints à
thank
cet effort,
companies
en
who have
particulier
joined us in these
l'engagement
efforts
de
and the
CMA
commitment
CGM.
of CMA
Cette nouvelle
CGM.
initiative fera
This new
suite au succès de la
initiative
Villa Albertine
builds on the Albertine
qui,
success,
dans plusieurs villes de votre pays,
and
a
several
d'ores et déjà
countries in your
accueilli
country have
180
now,
créateurs et
several
intellectuels
cities
en
have
l'espace
now
de 2 ans. Au total, dans une
welcomed
cinquantaine de
incubators
villes.
in about
Je ne
50
serai pas plus
cities.
long.
So I
Je
won't
vous
take up
dirai
any
que
more of your time,
sur
but allow me to
les
say
guerres
that
aujourd'hui
in the wars today,
qui endolorissent le cours du monde, sur les grands sujets
which affect the
internationaux
world,
comme sur la
and
relation
major
bilatérale,
topics
nous avons à
around the
cœur avec
world
le
and
président
bilateral
Biden
agreements, we are in full
d'avancer sur
agreement
une
with
feuille de
President
route
Diamond
commune.
in a common
qui est la
roadmap.
confiance dans le progrès,
And this is
la
our
confiance
trust
dans
in progress,
l'investissement, la relance,
in the investment,
l'innovation,
in recovery,
une
in
volonté de
innovation,
créer des
a
emplois
willingness
aux
to create
États-Unis comme en
jobs in
Europe
the United States and
pour
in
nos
Europe
travailleurs, une volonté
for our workers, and the
d'être au
willingness
rendez-vous de la décarbonation de
to
nos
be there for the
économies,
decarbonization
et de
of our
bâtir la paix.
economies and to build peace.
De le faire sans naïveté,
To do it
c'est-à-dire
without
d'être aux
being
côtés de ceux
naive,
qui résistent,
so to be
de le
on the
faire sans
side of those who are
naïveté, c'est-à-dire de
resisting,
chercher les
but
accords, y
without
compris les plus
naivete.
exigeants.
So looking for
Et pour cela,
agreements,
Monsieur le
even when
Président,
it's
je
very
vous
difficult.
remercie
And this is why, Mr. President, I thank
d'être
you
le président de la première puissance
for
mondiale,
being
mais
the
de le faire
president of
avec
the world's
la
greatest
clarté
power,
et la
but to do it
loyauté d'un
with
partenaire qui
the
aime et qui
clarity and
respecte
the
les
loyalty
Européens,
of a partner who
et
respects
celui qui veut
Europeans
justement
and who
bâtir ces
wishes
accords.
to respect these
L'Ukraine, au
agreements.
Proche-Orient, en passant
In
par ce
Ukraine,
que
in the
nous
Middle
pouvons
East,
reprendre sur le plan
and
économique.
also economically
Merci
speaking.
d'être
Thank you
présent sur tous ces dossiers.
for your
Merci une fois
presence,
encore d'honorer Paris,
and thank you
la
for
Normandie et la
honoring
France
Paris, Normandy,
de
and
ces célébrations
France
et de cette visite
with these
d'État
celebrations
avec
and your
votre
state visit with your
Merci,
wife.
Président.
Thank you, President.
Well, Mr. President, thank you. It's been a great honor to be here. Not only the Normandy events, but it was a moving experience for a student of French history to be the Champs-Élysées today. It was a moving experience for us, for the whole delegation. France was our first friend. It remains one of our best friends. This week, we reaffirm that friendship in a deeply meaningful way. But before I begin my remarks, I want to echo President Macron's comments welcoming the safe rescue of 4 hostages that were returned to their families in Israel. We won't stop working until all the hostages come home and a ceasefire is reached. That is essential to happen. Together we marked the 80th anniversary of the Allied operation that saved Europe and incredible heroes who carried it out. I found it 180 brave men, happened to be all men at the time, who came back to Normandy this week with such pride and sense of devotion. I don't think anyone who got to meet them, shake their hands, or hear their stories will ever forget their stories or the look in their eyes and the pride they took with what they did. But you could also see they're remembering the lost comrades at the same time. The fact is that I know I won't forget it. And I want to thank President Macron, Mrs. Macron, for the people of France for making our heroes feel so welcome, because they did feel welcome. You could feel it, you could see it. And we'll never forget what they did. And this week we have showed the world once again the power of allies and what we can achieve when we stand together. That's what this relationship between France and the United States exemplifies. We see it in Ukraine, where our 2 countries are standing with the Ukrainian people as they fight off Putin's brutal aggression. And yesterday I announced $225 million in new security assistance to Ukraine, and it's the 6th package we've provided since we signed the national security legislation earlier this year. I wish we could have done it when we wanted to 6 months earlier, but we got it done. With $61 billion in additional aid to Ukraine. And I commend France and our European allies for their leadership as well. The EU has provided over $107 billion in assistance to Ukraine since the war began, because we know what happens if Putin succeeds in subjugating Ukraine. And we won't stop. Putin's not going to stop at Ukraine. It's not just Ukraine. It's about much more than Ukraine. All of Europe will be threatened. We're not going to let that happen. The United States is standing strong with Ukraine. We're standing with our allies, and we're standing with France. We will not, say it again, walk away. And around the world, France and the United States are working together to strengthen security and shared prosperity. In the Indo-Pacific, we stand together for freedom of navigation, transparent governments, as well as fair economic practices. In the Middle East, in North Africa, we work together on issues critical to peace and stability, like food security and counterterrorism. And the existential threat of climate change, which is just growing greater, we're working together to accelerate the global transition to net zero. It is the existential threat to humanity among the only existential threat to humanity, including nuclear weapons, is if we do nothing on climate change. I could go on. Every day, the French people and the American people are connected in countless ways through economic ties, collaboration in science and technology, educational exchanges. The reason we don't have more Americans coming, we're afraid they won't come home. Such a beautiful, this is such an incredible country, such a beautiful country. And, the fact is that these cherished ties between our families and friends continues to grow. The bonds between our nation are strong, vast, and rooted in the most important element, shared values. That's true today as it's been from the very start. In a few weeks, the United States will celebrate the 4th of July, our Day of Independence. That feat would not have been possible, it's not hyperbole, would not have been possible were it not for France coming to our aid. We're a nation because of France in large part. You stepped up when we needed help, and you did it. That's what 4th of July is about. That feat would not have been possible, again, without your support, without French support. Today, I proudly stand with France to support freedom and democracy around the world. That's what this spectacular week is all about. Mr. President, there's much more we had the chance to talk about. We're going to continue to talk. You've become a good friend, and I really appreciate your cooperation and your insights. Thank you, thank you, thank you.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much.
President.